It's exactly 8:57 a.m. We are now joined by Professor Mthunzi Mdwaba. He is the CEO of TZoro Global Advisory and Thuja, and also chair of KasiKonnect and Kane Holdings. We're looking at the issue in Burkina Faso, and we're now hearing that Traore has made statements. He actually spoke to journalists in a very lengthy interview on state television. And he has gone on to say, and I quote, "People need to forget about the issue of democracy. We have to tell the truth. Democracy isn't for us. Democracy kills. And democracy is slavery." Those are some of the quotes and some of the things he had said on state television in this very lengthy interview. So what does that mean for the people of Burkina Faso, and what does it mean 3 months after the elections? Where do we stand, and how do we see this situation folding out in Burkina Faso? Professor Mthunzi Mdwaba, a very good morning to you. Welcome.
A very good morning to you, Julie. It's been a while. Lovely to see you, and thank you that you have me on your program.
Likewise. Welcome back. Lovely to have you here. And of course, we are going to be really picking your brain regarding this matter. So what are your thoughts after having heard about these rantings by Traore? And does that bode ill? And is it problematic for Burkina Faso?
So, Julie, I cannot recall if it was you or another television station that interviewed me when I mentioned that I don't have many people I look up to, but Ibrahim Traore is certainly one of them. But irrespective as to which platform I mention this on, I think we need to be very careful with the words, and we need to be very careful with context. So when you, for example, say that it is rentings, I would be very careful with that, because I do not believe these are rentings. I think that we always need to ask ourselves as Africans foremost as to what does democracy mean to us? What is the meaning of democracy? Because for some of us, democracy, even though it is put forward as being, what we would call the power is vested in the people and it's exercised by the people directly, and in a democratic state you've got elected representatives. But at the same time, it is a concept that I believe in Africa and many developing countries has proved very unwieldy. Because in the first place, it was very imposed on us by Western forces who built it for us, and who don't, when it's convenient for them, abide and comply by the very principles that are supposed to be the building blocks of a democracy. So for me, I'm not concerned at all by what he says. I think that Africa is waking up. There is an awakening, an appreciation that we need to come up with our own concepts. We need to come up with our own formulations of what works for Africa without taking models that are imposed and not customized for us.
So then obviously in that context, we do need to break it down and perhaps, communicate or disseminate the type of democracy that works for us in Africa. Because clearly, if we're saying that we as Africans will not subscribe to Western values of democracy, their values, Western democracy has been imposed upon us in Africa and obviously in other third world countries. And we've abided and subscribed to those for hundreds of years. We don't know anything different. So it's going to take a lot of unlearning and relearning of what democracy means. And still, sadly, we as Black and brown people still look towards the West and their blueprints regarding democracy, governance, and I think just life in general. But having said that, we also know that sadly, there is a lot of corruption within governments, not only in Africa, not only in third world countries, but all around the world. It's just that I think Western governments perhaps are smarter and in hiding their corrupt activities. Perhaps we in third world countries are not as smart in covering up all our shenanigans. So that's the one issue. Let's get back to Ibrahim Traore. We know that he has gained widespread admiration from the African diaspora, and of course, a noted figure like yourself, Professor, for his anti-Western rhetoric. Initially promised to organize elections in 2024. Then a year later, the leader reneged and said elections would not be held until all parts of Burkina Faso are safe for voting. Certain people would see this as a delaying tactic. Certain people would also see, and of course you don't like the word I used earlier on, rantings. So his speech on state television about, not to impose democracy in Burkina Faso. He also goes on to use Libya as an example. He says that they are a prime example right next door to us, to quote him. Everywhere they try to establish democracy in the world, it's done with bloodshed. So I've kind of given some context to my thinking and questioning around this matter. Your response?
Well, thank you for your context. I appreciate it. I think when you work on a reset, I think the world, the global village, or the geo-complexities of the world are at a point where we need to reset. And when you work on a reset, it is very confusing. So I don't blame people for being concerned when somebody says forget about democracy, because you must remember, I am on record as saying, as Africans, South Africans, Zimbabweans, Kenyans, people in Burkina Faso, people in DRC, people in Cote d'Ivoire, we are a people that have been very well colonized. We were so well colonized that, and I always like to say that even as we object to colonization, we never realize how much we are part of colonization. So even as you say, I don't want colonization, you then say things that a typical person who's been colonized would say, because that's the only experience you know. There's no other way of framing the things we know. So for me, that's my response first to the context. So the world, and as you know, I've been in the United Nations for many years. I've led in the ILO. I was the first African to lead ever in the International Labour Organization, which is part of the UN family. It's not UN, but it's part of the UN family. And so these words, this context is something I know very well, because I worked from within that crawl. I have seen the hypocrisy of the world. I've listened to how people speak from both sides of the mouth. When it's convenient for them, it's okay. When it's not convenient, it's not okay. They're always looking to shape us and make us very compliant little subjects that always do what they want. Now, we have a situation here, an opportunity. The Sahel countries, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, they have watched how, since they have decided that they want to extricate themselves in a very conscious and intentional way from Western forces, they have grown from an agricultural point of view. They are able to feed their people better. They have grown immensely from a mining point of view. They are able to make more money for their economies. They've been able to build better roads, and they're busy with those roads and infrastructure, for example, in Burkina Faso, so that their people are able, to be able to ply their trade and do things better. Now, for me, I don't even know that the word democracy should be the word we use. I'm grateful to the Lord, and I'm grateful to the universe that before I did law, I majored in African politics and I majored in industrial sociology. It's coming in very handy now because now I'm beginning to reopen and go back to all these concepts that one was taught. When you talk democracy, when you talk values, you mentioned the word values. Whose values? What values are we talking about? As Africans, for example, I had a lecture at the University of Fort Hare where they asked me to talk about leadership and corporate social responsibility. It took me a while to realize that actually this concept of corporate social responsibility in itself is a misnomer of sorts for us. It's a red herring for us because it takes us away from the concepts of Ubuntu that predate corporate social responsibility. When you talk about Ubuntu, you're talking about the collective. You're talking about how relevance for the village, relevance for the city, relevance for the rural, regional environment you are talking about. And when you talk about it, for us, leadership is consultative. Leadership means you are doing things in the best interest of everybody that belongs to this African spirituality, African philosophy. So I think now we are going back to sovereignty. Finally, it's taken us a long time. It's going to be slow. And when you look at the fact that there's been many attempts on Traore's life to kill him, fortunately, he surrounded himself with the kind of people who are also at a mature level of consciousness, who've been able to refuse approaches of being paid by people who come from the West to get rid of them. You know, you see people, you see leaders or supposed leaders in the West who say nothing when things happen in our countries, who say nothing when things happen in Lebanon, who say nothing when things happen in the Gaza, who say nothing when things happen in territories that are not part of NATO. But as soon as it's something to do with NATO, you see them all rise. You see them say, no, enough is enough, to bullies like Trump, right? Now, for me, as we redo the global African environment of the global village, I think we need to be very clear that we're going to do things our way. So for me, for example, I would say, think of Singapore. When you think of Singapore, do you think of a democracy? When you think of Rwanda, not saying they are perfect, do you think of a democracy? Maybe we are good with benevolent dictators and without the negative connotation that is associated to benevolent dictator and being authoritarian as a leader and having absolute political power. But maybe in our development as a people, as we undo all the bad things that have been done to us, as we undo the colonization, as we undo the lies that have been given us, as we undo the fact that capital in itself, when you think of people who want to invest, you know that the people in the West knows that the best territories to invest in is Africa. When you look at the sustainable development goals that come from the UN, and then you look at the EU, the European Union 2063 agenda, and you look at item 6 and item 7 of that agenda, then you realize that actually capital from the West is always going to be racist. Capital is always going to be class-based. We are never, whether we have a democracy or you call it a whatever-cracy, they're never going to come here, right, and do things our way. So we need to be in control and in charge of our narrative. We must lead the way we as Africans believe these are things that are good for us. So me, I'm all for trying what the Sahel countries are doing. It's worth a try because for many years, all we've known is poverty. All we've known is unemployment. Whilst they get richer and richer, whilst they get more and more powerful, using our minerals, using our people, using our resources, our human resources. So for me, I think we are going in the right direction, Julie.
Okay, Professor, you know, you and I need an entire day to unpack so much on this show. I mean, you know, as you were responding to my context, so many other issues popped into my head. We've only got about 4 minutes to end this interview, but I'm going to throw something at you. And if you can please try and squeeze it into the next 4 minutes.
Okay.
You talk about our ideas as Africans and third world countries, ideas of democracy is very different to that of the global north. And immediately what popped into my head was Thabo Mbeki and the African Renaissance. How does that talk to us? Then you also mentioned Rwanda being also Singapore and Rwanda. But with Rwanda, there is also the whisperings of being supported and backed very heavily by Israel, the Zionist Israel. So, if you can put that into context for us, because people are raving about Rwanda, but where and how did they get funded to be where they are currently? And then also, when you talk democracy, un-Western democracy, what also comes to my mind as a Muslim woman is the law of Sharia, the Sharia law, which Westerners look upon it as being a brutal law. But as a Muslim, as a born Muslim, I know that it is one of the most just laws ever. And I don't think I'm being biased at all when I say this, because I've lived it. I am a Muslim woman living amongst my people, and I know that there couldn't be anything more just than Sharia law. And yet Westerners look upon it very differently. Your thoughts in the next 4 minutes, please.
Okay, first of all, let's start with the Sharia law. The Sharia law is a very just law, but like everything else that does not belong to the West, it will be vilified. They vilify anything that is not theirs. They seek to put us in holes and pigeonholes that are convenient for them. That's the first one. The second one about Rwanda and the rumors. There's a lot of rumors about a lot of things. It would be sad and unfortunate for me if Rwanda indeed is being funded by Israel. But let's take my comments from the context of the benevolent dictator rather than a democracy. We can talk about those geopolitical contradictions and complexities, because there will always be contradictions in a world like ours. And we've got to unpack stuff that's like butter, where now everything is integrated into each other and it's difficult to separate and see things for what they are. And I think as we move into the future, my view is that we need to give the Sahel countries an opportunity. We need to give somebody like Traore an opportunity. The fact that there's been so many attempts to assassinate him, that in itself should tell you that there is a problem. Why do they want to kill him? Why is it that somebody who's a symbol for Burkina Faso, who's a symbol for Africa, what has it got to do with them? Why is it threatening to them? These are the things. I mean, why was Sankara killed? I believe that Traore is a reincarnation of Sankara. Thomas Sankara, as you know, was killed by Belgians. Now, all of a sudden, Ghana goes to the UN and pushes for slavery to be seen as a historic humanitarian transgression and whatever. And now they're saying, yes, yes, yes. But of course, they'll say, yes, 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 as long as you don't ask them for reparations. So yes, you and I need a lot of time, Julie, because I cannot cover everything all at once in the 3 minutes and in the 1 minute that I have. But I hope I've tried to answer you as much as I can. And I do look forward to a follow-up that can focus more on these issues for us.
Absolutely. I'm going to take you up on that. But just very quickly, 1 minute, Thabo Mbeki's African Renaissance. Is this talking directly to Ibrahim Traore's mission?
It is. I mean, Thabo Mbeki himself got lost in his own translation of what that meant, I suppose, because I think he was confused by other forces that he has to abide by. But you also know that Thabo Mbeki was attacked. The HIV/AIDS debacle. You know that it wasn't because the guy was saying there's no HIV, there's no AIDS, but he was threatening the pharmaceutical companies. He was threatening everything that's in the West. He was threatening the status quo as it then was. So for me, it is talking to that. You may also know that Thabo Mbeki has been, I haven't checked lately, but he was supposed to be available for another term, has been the chairperson of the South Center that is based in Geneva. Now, the South Center is made up, I think, of about 54 countries on South-South cooperation. So we need now, as the South, we need now involving the BRICS and all the things that are structures that have been built that are now taking prominence to go back to not only the African Renaissance, but the Latin American Renaissance, the developing Renaissance is what I would call it.
And unfortunately, that's where we have to leave it. Definitely have to have a much longer, in-depth interview with you to unpack all of these issues. Thank you indeed for your time, and God bless.
Thank you, and assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam. It is exactly 16 after 9 o'clock. This is News and Views moving along. A reminder once again that this hour of News and Views is brought to you by Africa Muslims Agencies, and also to remind you that our Fired Up series with Hafiz Imran Chunara, personal excellence mentor and CEO of Africa Muslims Agencies, will be talking to us a little later today. And the subject on the Fired Up series is teach deliberately what you do instinctively. It is 17 after 9.